Rome falls, but the church does not vanish. Instead, it begins learning how to survive without an empire. Arian warriors conquer Catholic cities, and suddenly, theology becomes a question of kingship, law, and survival. One Frankish king chooses baptism, and that decision will redirect the political future of Western Europe. A monk writes instructions about food, obedience, prayer, and work. Those guidelines will outlive kingdoms and dynasties. Irish monks sail outward while armies move inward, carrying books and Christianity into lands Rome never fully mastered. In Britain, rival Christian traditions argue over Easter, tonsures, bishops, monasteries, and whose customs should define the church. In Italy, emperors disappear, Gothic kings rise, and the Bishop of Rome begins carrying burdens once handled by government. The old world is breaking apart, but inside that collapse, a new Christian order is quietly taking shape. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not produce one successor, but many independent kingdoms across its former territories, altering regional politics. Each kingdom had to decide how conquered Romans, Germanic rulers, bishops, landowners, and local laws would fit together, reshaping civic, social arrangements. These political experiments created new possibilities for Christianity while also forcing the church into unfamiliar and dangerous compromises. Most invaders had not dreamed of destroying Roman civilization. Many wanted to settle inside it and enjoy its benefits, seeking imperial security. Their migrations often ended wherever military fortunes, pressure from rival peoples, or imperial weakness finally allowed them to remain, establishing permanent homelands. The result was not a clean replacement of Rome, but a patchwork of peoples adapting Roman institutions to new rulers, reworking inherited systems. Germanic kings inherited cities, roads, estates, tax habits, Christian populations, and the practical need to govern people unlike themselves, demanding effective governance. The church therefore became one of the few institutions able to connect collapsing Roman administration with emerging barbarian authority, bridging competing authorities. Bishops could negotiate, preserve records, represent cities, and give moral legitimacy to rulers still learning how to govern. Yet those same bishops could also become dependent on kings who controlled land, offices, armies, and appointments within their territories, complicating episcopal independence. The Western Church entered the early Middle Ages carrying Roman memory while learning to function inside fragmented political worlds, adapting to fragmentation. Some kingdoms remained Arian, others became Catholic, and several shifted repeatedly as rulers searched for political stability. That religious divide mattered because the conquered Roman population was usually Nicene, while many Germanic elites were Arian Christians, entrenching confessional tension. The new order would therefore be shaped by conversions, marriages, councils, persecutions, compromises, and the slow fusion of cultures, forging medieval society. The Vandals crossed the Rhine in 407, moved through Gaul and Spain, then passed into North Africa in 429, opening African conquest. 10 years later, they captured Carthage, making themselves masters of the rich African coast from the Atlantic to Egypt, securing Mediterranean wealth. From Sicily and Corsica to Sardinia, Vandal sea power extended across the central Mediterranean and threatened Roman communications. In 455, their forces sacked Rome, carrying away wealth and deepening the sense that Western imperial order was collapsing, shattering public confidence. For the North African Church, Vandal rule proved especially disastrous because the conquerors adhered firmly to Arian Christianity. Their rulers rejected the Nicene definition that Arians had opposed throughout the 4th century controversies over Christ's divinity. Repeated waves of persecution struck Catholic Christians and Donatists alike, while the older African schism had never fully disappeared, reopening old divisions. The conquered population therefore faced both political domination and religious pressure from rulers belonging to a rival Christian tradition, tightening confessional control. The Vandal kingdom lasted almost a century, long enough to transform the religious and political map of Roman Africa, remaking African Christianity. Then, Emperor Justinian's general Belisarius crossed from Constantinople and destroyed Vandal power in a remarkably rapid campaign. North Africa returned briefly to Roman imperial rule, but the recovery would prove temporary rather than permanent. The Eastern conquerors brought another form of Christianity, differing in doctrine from many Western Catholics, even while calling itself Roman, complicating Catholic relations. By the late 7th century, Muslim conquest divided African Christianity badly, and the ancient Latin Church there eventually disappeared, ending ecclesiastical dominance. The region that had produced Tertullian, Cyprian, and Augustine would no longer remain a central heartland of Western Christianity, shifting influence northward. The Visigoths entered the Western story after defeating Roman forces at Adrianople and later moving into Gaul and Spain, launching new settlement. In 410, their king, Alaric, captured Rome, an event that shocked contemporaries, even though the empire itself still survived, marking Western memory. By 415, the Visigoths held a large kingdom extending across southwestern Gaul and much of the Iberian Peninsula. That kingdom endured for centuries, surviving political murders, wars, dynastic instability, and the repeated violence of royal succession. Most Visigothic kings did not die peacefully. Many were murdered, deposed, or killed in battle before completing their reigns, destabilizing royal succession. The Visigothic elite was Arian, while most of its Hispano-Roman subjects remained Catholic, creating a dangerous religious division. Unlike the Vandals, however, Visigothic rulers generally did not persecute Catholic subjects simply for belonging to the Nicene Church, limiting religious coercion. Their kingdom needed stability, and religious separation between rulers and population made political cohesion much harder to achieve. King Recared finally addressed the problem by formally abandoning Arianism and embracing Nicene Catholic Christianity in 589. At a great assembly in Toledo, most Visigothic nobles followed their king and entered communion with the Catholic Church, uniting Gothic elites. Afterward, Catholic bishops gained a new role in preserving political order, advising kings, and shaping legislation for the kingdom, expanding episcopal influence. Church councils increasingly functioned almost like national assemblies, where ecclesiastical leaders helped decide matters affecting the entire realm. One outstanding figure was Isidore of Seville, a scholar determined to preserve as much ancient learning as possible. His etymologies gathered material on religion, astronomy, medicine, agriculture, language, and nearly every other field known to his age, preserving ancient knowledge. The work was often uncritical and derivative, yet it became a leading schoolbook of the Middle Ages, educating generations across medieval Europe. Through Isidore, later students learned fragments of the classical world that might otherwise have disappeared amid political disorder. The Church also became a legislator, sometimes attempting to regulate clergy, marriages, conversion, and the behavior of religious minorities, extending ecclesiastical authority. Some of those laws were harsh, especially toward Jews, revealing how Christian political power could quickly become coercive. Councils prohibited forced conversion in principle, yet also punished converts who later returned to their ancestral Jewish faith. By 711, Muslim armies invaded Spain, ending Visigothic rule and opening an entirely different chapter in Iberian history. During the 5th century, Gaul was divided mainly between Burgundians, who were Arian, and Franks, who remained pagan. The Burgundians usually avoided persecuting Catholics, much as the Visigoths had done across the Pyrenees in neighboring Spain. Instead, many Burgundian rulers tried to imitate Roman customs and eventually became willing to reconsider their inherited Arian Christianity, loosening doctrinal commitments. In 516, King Sigismund embraced Orthodox Trinitarian doctrine, and many across the Burgundian kingdom followed his change in faith, realigning communal belief. The Franks began from a different position, because their early rulers were still pagan rather than Arian Christians. Their first durable unity came under the Merovingian dynasty, named after the legendary founder Merovius, and led by Clovis, consolidating Frankish rule. Clovis was married to a Christian Burgundian princess, and his wife repeatedly urged him to accept her faith. According to the traditional account, he promised conversion if his wife's god granted him victory in battle. On Christmas Day in 496, Clovis received baptism, and many of his nobles entered the church beside him. Soon, most Franks were baptized, giving their kingdom a religious identity different from many neighboring Germanic rulers. Unlike Arian Goths, the Frankish monarchy now shared the Nicene faith of much of the older Gallo-Roman population. That shared religion helped reduce one major barrier between conquerors and conquered, even when political violence remained common, easing ethnic religious barriers. In 534, the Franks conquered the Burgundians, bringing most of Gaul under a single, expanding political power. Later Merovingian kings weakened, while palace officials called mayors increasingly exercised the practical authority of government. Charles Martel became the most famous of these mayors, after leading Frankish forces against Muslim armies from Spain. In 732, he defeated them near Tours or Poitiers, a victory later remembered as a major turning point. By then, the mayor possessed the power, while the Merovingian king increasingly retained only the title and ceremonial prestige, hollowing royal authority. Charles's son Pippin finally deposed Childeric III with papal consent and placed the old dynasty inside a monastery. Bishop Boniface anointed Pippin as king while acting under papal instructions, giving the new dynasty sacred legitimacy. That alliance prepared the way for Pippin's son Charlemagne, whose reign would transform both church and Western kingship. The church survived through these upheavals, but survival under powerful kings frequently came with uncomfortable political dependence. Under rulers like Clovis, ecclesiastical leaders often seemed content to support royal authority rather than challenge it. Kings soon treated episcopal vacancies as political opportunities, deciding which candidate should occupy influential and wealthy bishoprics. Because bishops controlled extensive lands, appointment to a church office could make a cleric one of the realm's great lords, blurring sacred boundaries. The distinction between spiritual office and political lordship therefore became increasingly difficult to maintain in practice. Shortly before Pippin's anointing, Boniface complained that Frankish church property was effectively controlled by secular aristocrats. Many bishops behaved more like territorial lords than pastors responsible for discipline, preaching, or reform within the church. Even the idea of regular councils had weakened, leaving few effective mechanisms for correcting abuses or renewing religious life, stifling internal renewal. These conditions continued through much of the Frankish period and would not be fully addressed until the age of Charlemagne, delaying institutional renewal. The church therefore entered medieval society as both a spiritual institution and a major owner of land and political privilege, expanding temporal influence. That dual role could protect Christian communities during chaos, but it also exposed church leaders to corruption and royal manipulation, inviting political abuse. The tension between independence and political protection would remain a defining problem throughout the medieval history of Western Christianity, shaping later conflict. The same rulers who defended churches could also dominate appointments, confiscate property, or reshape religious structures for political purposes, enabling secular interference. Yet, without such rulers, many communities lacked armies, administrators, or stable courts capable of maintaining public order. This uneasy partnership between throne and altar would become one of the central institutions inherited by medieval Europe. It would also create future conflicts whenever popes, bishops, kings, or emperors disagreed over where ultimate authority actually belonged, raising jurisdictional disputes. The Frankish experience showed that Christianity could unify a kingdom while simultaneously becoming deeply entangled in its political machinery, binding church governance. That entanglement would soon make reform movements necessary, but it also gave the church unprecedented reach throughout ordinary society, expanding social influence. The emerging medieval order was therefore neither exclusively religious nor simply political, but a constantly negotiated combination of both, defining social governance. As Rome disappeared as a Western government, local kings and bishops increasingly became the authorities ordinary Christians actually encountered, shifting power locally. Britain had never been entirely Roman, and imperial control was weakest beyond the defensive frontier created by Hadrian's Wall, leaving northern autonomy. When Roman legions withdrew, many Romanized inhabitants left, while those who remained faced invasion by Angles and Saxons. The newcomers founded several pagan kingdoms, including Kent, Essex, Sussex, East Anglia, Wessex, Northumbria, and Mercia. Yet older Christian communities survived in parts of Britain, preserving traditions inherited from the centuries of Roman occupation. At the same time, Christianity flourished in Ireland, which had never been conquered or governed as a Roman province, nurturing independent traditions. Because Irish Christianity preserved faith and learning, it soon began sending missionaries into neighboring regions weakened by Germanic invasions, carrying missions abroad. The most famous missionary was Columba, who settled with 12 companions on the small island of Iona around 563, creating mission foothold. The monastery founded there became a missionary center for Scotland and inspired additional communities patterned after the Iona model, multiplying island missions. From Scotland, these missions moved south into northern British territories governed by Anglo-Saxon rulers across the region. Irish Christianity also helped spread private confession to a priest, often accompanied by practical manuals for confessors. That practice emerged as a major and lasting Irish influence on Christian life throughout Western Europe, reshaping regional confession for centuries afterward. Scotch-Irish Christianity differed from Roman practice because its leaders were commonly abbots rather than bishops governing territorial dioceses. The traditions also differed over certain rites, the calculation of Easter, and the characteristic style of monastic tonsure. Scotch-Irish monks shaved the front of the head rather than the crown, giving their communities a visibly different appearance, marking communal identity. These differences seemed small, but they represented deeper questions about which inherited customs should guide the emerging English Church, testing received authority. The answer would eventually come through confrontation between the older Celtic tradition and missionaries sent directly from Rome. Britain therefore became a meeting place where different Christian cultures negotiated authority, ritual, leadership, and historical memory. That negotiation would shape the future church in England and strengthen its eventual connection with the wider Western Christian world, integrating English Christianity. Christianity had never vanished completely from Britain, and new interest on the continent eventually focused attention on the Anglo-Saxons, reviving English mission. A later biography tells how the young Gregory saw fair-haired English boys being sold as slaves in a Roman market, inspiring missionary memory. The famous dialogue about Angles and angels may be legendary, but Gregory's concern for their conversion was unquestionably real, revealing papal purpose. After becoming pope in 590, Gregory sent Augustine, a monk from his own monastery, to evangelize England. Augustine and his companions almost abandoned the mission when they heard frightening reports about the people awaiting them. Gregory refused to release them, and the missionaries finally continued across the Channel toward the Kingdom of Kent. King Ethelbert had married a Christian woman, giving the mission an opening within an otherwise still pagan royal court. At first, the missionaries achieved little, but Ethelbert eventually converted, and large numbers of subjects followed their king. Augustine became Archbishop of Canterbury, which gradually emerged as the principal ecclesiastical center of the developing English Church. As other kingdoms converted, Roman customs spread beside older Scotch-Irish traditions that had already taken deep root in Britain, producing ritual competition. In Northumbria, the conflict became serious because the royal court observed one tradition while the queen followed another. Even Easter could be celebrated on different dates, creating the awkward spectacle of one household fasting while another feasted, exposing ritual division. A synod at Whitby in 663 finally addressed the dispute and heard arguments from both competing Christian traditions. The Roman side appealed to St. Peter and the keys of the kingdom, an argument that impressed the king decisively, shaping royal allegiance. The synod chose the Roman calculation and customs for theological reasons, but also under pressure from growing continental prestige, steadily strengthening unified practice. Similar decisions across the British Isles gradually brought local churches into closer conformity with Western European Christianity. Italy entered the post-imperial age in confusion because the last Western emperors had become puppets of Germanic military leaders, ending centralized sovereignty. In 476, Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus and informed Constantinople that a separate Western emperor was no longer necessary. Emperor Zeno eventually encouraged the Ostrogoths to invade Italy and remove Odoacer, creating another Germanic kingdom on Roman soil, recasting Italian rule. For a time, Ostrogothic rule brought stability, but the conquerors were Arian, while most Italians remained Nicene Christians, sustaining confessional political tension. Italian Catholics naturally looked toward Constantinople for support, and that relationship made Gothic rulers increasingly suspicious of divided loyalties, heightening royal anxiety. The senator Boethius was arrested on charges of conspiracy and imprisoned under King Theodoric despite his distinguished public career, ending senatorial security. In prison, he wrote The Consolation of Philosophy, a work later cherished throughout the Middle Ages for its reflections on fortune. Boethius was executed in 524, and Pope John I died in prison 2 years later amid the same atmosphere of suspicion. The tension between Arian rulers and Nicene subjects grew steadily harder to contain within the Ostrogothic kingdom. Justinian then launched a campaign to reconquer Italy, sending Belisarius and beginning 2 decades of destructive warfare. The Ostrogothic kingdom disappeared, but the imperial victory left Italy exhausted, depopulated, damaged, and politically fragile. In 568, the Lombards invaded from the north, before Constantinople had consolidated its newly restored authority. Had the Lombards remained united, they might have conquered all Italy, but rival leaders quickly fragmented their advance. Byzantine control weakened after Justinian's death, leaving Rome and other unconquered cities increasingly responsible for their own defense. The popes, therefore, began carrying civic burdens that once belonged naturally to imperial administrators and military officials. When Benedict I died in 579, Lombard armies were already threatening Rome itself with direct siege and destruction. Pelagius II bought them off, then appealed to the Franks because Constantinople could no longer provide reliable military assistance, redirecting papal diplomacy. That appeal foreshadowed a decisive shift. The papacy would increasingly seek protection northward rather than eastward toward Byzantium. Amid political disorder, another institution was quietly preparing to give Western Christianity lasting continuity: monasticism, organized around Benedict. Western monks existed before Benedict, but their tradition differed in important ways from the older monasticism of Egypt and Syria, favoring practical discipline. Western practice was generally more practical, aiming at disciplined life rather than dramatic forms of bodily self-punishment. It also emphasized community over solitary withdrawal, making shared religious life more central than the heroic isolation of hermits, prioritizing common devotion. Western monasteries usually remained connected with bishops and the wider church, rather than living permanently outside ecclesiastical structures. The decisive figure in shaping this tradition was Benedict, born around 480 in the small Italian town of Nursia, beginning lasting influence. His family belonged to the old Roman aristocracy and understood the tensions dividing Orthodox Christians from Arian Gothic rulers, shaping Benedict's outlook. Around the age of 20, Benedict abandoned social ambition, became a hermit, and withdrew into a cave. He soon discovered that solitude did not automatically end temptation, conflict, or the persistent struggles of ordinary human desire, challenging ascetic expectations. His reputation nevertheless grew, and admirers eventually gathered around him seeking guidance in a more organized religious life. When one location became unsuitable, Benedict moved with his community to Monte Cassino, farther from the distractions surrounding them, seeking greater separation. The site still contained a sacred grove where local inhabitants practiced ancient pagan worship, revealing how incomplete Christianization remained, confirming older survivals. Benedict and his followers replaced that pagan space with a monastery, transforming the landscape through a new communal discipline, reordering sacred ground. His sister Scholastica later settled nearby and established a similar religious community for women, following the same broad ideals, extending female monasticism. Benedict's fame eventually became great enough that even an Ostrogothic king came to visit the respected monk personally. According to tradition, Benedict answered the ruler bluntly and warned him about the tyranny he believed the king practiced, challenging royal conduct. Benedict's greatest importance did not lie in miracles or royal encounters, but in the rule he gave his community, defining Western monasticism. That document would shape Western monasticism for centuries by offering disciplined order without demanding constant heroic extremism. The rule deliberately rejected excessive harshness and tried instead to create a sustainable way of religious life for ordinary people, moderating ascetic discipline. Unlike many desert monks, Benedict's communities ate regular meals and were permitted cooked food, fruit, vegetables, and daily wine, normalizing humane provision. Each monk received a bed and covering, while clothing was adjusted according to climate, abundance, and practical necessity. The goal was not luxury, but a disciplined moderation that removed unnecessary suffering without encouraging softness or self-indulgence. Two vows stood at the center of monastic life: stability and obedience, each shaping the monk's relationship with community, structuring communal commitment. Stability meant a monk could not simply leave whenever another monastery appeared more attractive, comfortable, or spiritually exciting. He was expected to remain in the community he had entered, binding religious growth to long-term relationships and shared responsibilities, anchoring lifelong stability. This commitment later helped monasteries become stable institutions, capable of preserving land, books, traditions, and economic resources. Obedience meant listening first to the rule, then to the abbot who governed the monastery under its authority. The monk was expected to obey promptly, but Benedict did not imagine the abbot as an unrestricted or arbitrary tyrant, limiting abbatial power. If a command seemed impossible, the monk could explain a difficulty before submitting as far as obedience reasonably allowed, allowing reasoned appeal. The abbot himself remained subject to God and the rule, and his title meant father rather than absolute master, restraining monastic authority. Discipline followed stages, beginning with private admonition and moving toward public correction only when repeated warnings failed. Persistent rebellion could bring excommunication, meaning separation from common meals, worship, and ordinary fellowship within the monastery. Even then, the expelled monk could be received again after repentance, sometimes repeatedly, before the community finally closed its doors, allowing renewed return. The rule was therefore designed for fallible human beings rather than legendary saints who supposedly never failed or needed correction, acknowledging ordinary weakness. Physical labor was shared by everyone because Benedict wanted no permanent servant class exempting privileged monks from ordinary work, equalizing daily duties. The sick, elderly, young, and those with exceptional responsibilities could receive adjustments, but the principle of shared labor remained, retaining common duty. Daily life in Benedict's monastery followed a carefully ordered rhythm balancing prayer, work, reading, meals, and rest. Private prayer had assigned periods, but most devotion occurred communally, in chapel, at regular hours throughout day and night, ordering communal worship. The community gathered 7 times by daylight and once at night to sing psalms and recite scripture. These services eventually became known as matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline across medieval Christianity. The 8 offices became the canonical hours, structuring monastic time around repeated returns to prayer rather than ordinary clocks, ordering daily life. Psalms were distributed so the entire Psalter would be recited each week alongside other readings from Scripture. Through constant repetition, many monks learned large portions of the Psalms and other biblical texts by heart. Similar devotional habits later spread among educated lay people who used books of hours to organize private prayer outside monasteries, influencing lay devotion. Study was not Benedict's central emphasis, yet the divine office itself required books, copying, reading, and careful preservation. Monks therefore became skilled copyists of biblical manuscripts and other works needed by their communities and future generations. Monasteries also became teaching centers, especially for children entrusted to them for religious formation and future monastic life. A guest house usually provided hospitality for travelers, making the monastery a refuge as well as a place of disciplined prayer, welcoming outsiders consistently. Over time, monasteries acquired marginal lands and brought them into production through the disciplined labor of their communities. In a society where elites often despised manual work, monks joined intellectual devotion with agriculture, craftsmanship, and practical service, dignifying productive labor. Monastic houses preserved manuscripts, educated children, sheltered travelers, cared for the sick, and distributed medicines to surrounding populations. When Monte Cassino was sacked in 589, surviving monks carried Benedict's rule with them as they fled toward Rome, carrying monastic continuity. Gregory the Great later knew that rule and missionaries like Augustine carried Benedictine patterns into England and beyond, spreading monastic models outward. With papal support, Benedictine practice spread across the Western Church, even without a centralized monastic order controlling every house, standardizing religious communities. Shared customs and ideals nevertheless gave Western monasticism a remarkable common identity across kingdoms divided by language and politics, crossing political boundaries. As Germanic kingdoms rose and fell, monasteries became some of the most durable institutions linking antiquity with medieval Europe, surviving political collapse.